All right, we're back for our next session of the second day of our 10th Streaming Media Connect virtual event. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the conference chair for streaming media, and I'm also chief marketing officer at Ideas. Like I said, this is our 10th virtual event, but we're going to be back in person in Boston for Streaming Media East in May 18th and 19th, with the Content Delivery Summit and Streaming Media University workshops on May 17th. So I hope to see you in person in Boston in May. The programs will be up on the websites relatively soon. The websites are open. Check that out soon and register soon for the best deal. Before we jump into today's or the next session, a reminder, every time you come into one of these sessions, the walk-up music played during the slides. Keep your ears open. See if you can identify it. First person to identify both the song and the artist, got to do them both, will win a $50 Amazon gift card. If no one gets it, we'll pick a name at random, and we'll announce the names at the end of each session, so you do have to be present to win, so stick around. If you have questions for our panel, please enter them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom window. The panelists will answer those questions live during the discussion, but if you put them in there rather than in the chat, it's easier for the moderator to keep track of them as they come in. Also, subtitles are turned on. If you want to turn them off, you can go to live transcript or subtitles or show captions at the bottom of your Zoom window and click on disable transcript, and that'll turn on. Finally, all of the Streaming Media Connect sessions are available online on demand beginning early next week. Steve Nathans-Kelly, our producer, will be posting that link to the YouTube channel in the chat momentarily. And you can also always go to streamingmedia.com, click on videos, and then click on conference videos for all of the on-demand videos from all of our previous events. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor, Signiant, for sponsoring all of this week's Streaming Media Connect, and we have a brief video message from them.
Wherever content needs to flow, the Signiant platform can move any size file over any IP network at speeds that can be up to 100 times faster than traditional transfer methods. More than 50,000 businesses use the Signiant platform to send and share files, automate movement of data between systems, exchange content with global partners, and move content to and from the cloud. The Signiant platform gives you the power to operate at the speed you need to run your business.
And I'd also like to thank the sponsor of this session, MediaPlatform. And MediaPlatform's Mike Newman will be joining the rest of the panel to talk about corporate video in the new normal. And our moderator, Andy Howard, will helm that conversation. And so I'm just going to pass it on over to Andy to take it away. Andy?
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. And welcome everybody to this session. We have an incredible panel lined up for today, and I'd like to say that I've been watching a bunch of these sessions, and I love the intro music. And this one in particular has a little bit of guitar, it sounded like, and we've got a couple people on the session that have some guitars on their background, so it should be interesting. But so let me go through a list of our speakers here. We have Dan Swiney from LinkedIn. We got Kory Doucette from Coinbase, Waseem Ahmad from EY, which is used to be named Ernst & Young, I believe, and Mike Newman, the sponsor from MediaPlatform. So my name's Andy Howard. I'm founder and managing director of Howard & Associates, which is a consulting company that helps organizations implement video communications. So video streaming, obviously, as well as video conferencing, a little bit of digital signage. Been lucky enough to have some great clients over the years, including Deloitte, BlackRock, Travelers, Aetna, and a bunch of other companies. So let me just go around the horn here, and I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. So Dan, why don't you start us off here?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan. I am from LinkedIn. In the true spirit of hybrid, I'm working from home today, so there will be barking dogs. I also have the obligatory kid home sick from school, so that could also come into frame, just fair warning. So I've been at LinkedIn for quite a while. I actually got into this kind of work through the IT side and streaming. So I started off doing surfing webcams between California and Hawaii. And as I joke, my job used to be to go and make sure that all these cameras were well maintained and still work. So I got to spend a month going up and down California or Hawaii. And then that morphed quickly into broadcast and streaming, and we streamed all kinds of events that essentially weren't on TV. So snowboarding, surfing, skateboarding, or drifting, car racing, everything that wasn't really making it onto broadcast TV at the time. And then I decided I needed a little bit of a shift, get a little more serious, and I updated my LinkedIn profile, and I got to reach out from a recruiter, and then made it past a very difficult interview process, including Kory right here, who interviewed me. And not sure if he gave me a pass, but I got the job. And then I've been at LinkedIn, and we've been doing everything from internal and external events using streaming, broadcast, video records, and on the LinkedIn learning side as well.
Right. That feeds in well to Kory. Why don't you introduce yourself, Kory, and also tell us what you have guitar-wise in your background, please.
Sure, you got it. Dan, you were a hard pass for me, but I got overruled, unfortunately. So, Kory Doucette, I most recently working from Coinbase, so managing their media productions department. I have a background in audio engineering. Wanted to be a studio engineer at some point. They don't pay very well, apparently, unless you're like top 0.5% in that realm, as a lot of you know. Ended up at Avid for quite some time, doing some product stuff for them, support for them. I was on the digi design side, so I'm working with Pro Tools quite heavily. And then made it over to LinkedIn, worked with Dan for a nice, almost about 7 years, I guess. It was a nice run over there doing corporate media. So branched out into live production, video production. We did some studio builds, space builds, and then moved on to Slack after that. And that branched out, it's more of the same stuff, but branched out to a lot of the conference room design, space design, office builds, decomps, things like that. And then did a little collaboration tools work there as well. And then most recently at Coinbase, more focused just on the media stuff and the in-office technology. Guitars, this is just a Mitchell acoustic and an Ibanez bass on the back there. So great to be here.
All right, very good. Waseem, why don't you go next?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Waseem Ahmad. I'm the global lead for streaming media services at EY. What that pretty much means is anything A to Z, from platform to consultation, to technical direction, to streaming, to encoding, CDN, eCDN, you name it, right? That's in my purview. I've been doing this now for 9 years. Have a computer engineering background. Worked a lot in the unified communication space, and then one day somebody said, webcasting is yours, and I was like, what's a webcast, right? Now it's a completely different story. Video is everything, right? In the enterprise, even us as consumers, what we take in. So it's exciting space. I'd like to say we've done a great job in molding it for our organization and doing what we do on a daily basis, partnering with people like Mike from MediaPlatform for a long time. If anybody knows what an ASX file is, I'd love to hear that in the chat, right? But it's been a while. The whole industry's come a long way, so I'm really excited to just share our wins and losses and pros and cons with everybody here.
All right, great. And last but certainly not least, my friend Mike Newman, our sponsor from MediaPlatform. Why don't you introduce yourself, Mike?
Absolutely, Andy. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Newman. I'm currently the CEO of MediaPlatform, but I've been in the streaming media industry for more than 20 years now. I founded a company called Accordant Technologies, which was one of the earliest companies to really focus on high-end corporate webcast production. And along the way, I met some incredibly creative people, and I absolutely love the space. So despite selling Accordant in 2011 to Polycom, I got back into the large live webcast production space as quickly as possible as the CEO of MediaPlatform, which gave me an opportunity to collaborate with people like Waseem and the rest of the people on this panel who are committed to creating extremely high production value content that really projects professionalism. It projects creative control. It projects the company's mission. So that's what I've been doing. And you may call those things on my wall guitars. I call them wall art because they don't come off the walls too frequently, but I've got a Paul Reed Smith and a Telecaster.
All right,
Thanks, Andy.
fantastic. All right, so this session is about sort of corporate video in the new normal, meaning, you know, now that the pandemic's largely over, people are starting to come back into the office, where we're going to go from here. But I think in order to know where we're going to go from here, we need to know what has happened in the last couple of years in terms of change that you guys have gone through. So why don't we start there and say, you know, how have things changed from, you know, say 3 years ago till today in your environment? Let's start there. So Dan, why don't you kick us off? Let's go around the horn again.
Sure. 3 years ago, we had it all figured out and we were good to go and we were in a rhythm and everything was the same every week, pretty much. So we were in a good place. And then obviously this came along. I conveniently was on leave at the time, but the team pivoted quickly to, at the time, we were really lucky because we had a lot of platforms. So we had the Microsoft suite, we had Zoom, and we had BlueJeans. And we actually went over initially, after a lot of discussion I wasn't there for, but settled on BlueJeans, and it was successful at a smaller scale for internal communications. But over time, as things scaled up, we ended up making a shift and going pretty quickly into a hybrid mode. We actually went into a vMix solution so instead of, you know, cutting the show in BlueJeans webinar or whatever it was called, and doing the stream out from there, we took it back into vMix first, and then ultimately settled for our internal content on using vMix and streaming internally with Yammer, which is a Microsoft product now called Viva Engage, I think. So that was our internal side. Today, fast forward to today, we are back in control rooms, back with racked gear. Our presenters are coming in remote, but most of the team now are back in the control room to be able to cut a show for internal. External, very quickly, we were sending out remote kits to instructors on the LinkedIn Learning side, and the video production team were similarly sending out little mirrorless cameras and microphone setups out, using tools to capture locally and then send that content back. I think the tool they've been using most is Riverside for capturing that content. Now, like I say, I didn't think it would happen this quickly in a way, but we're sort of back to a 3-year-old normal, except for bringing in guests.
vMix is basically production software in the cloud, so you had to go to that model because people were working from home.
Right. So the crew
the production team's actually coming back into a central location, so you're just bringing the feeds all back into that central location and then sending them out.
Yeah, because the crew was working from home and relying on their home connections. So that's where we were. That's going to interim. We had a mix of both cloud and our own servers running vMix just for various security reasons. Like some of our content can't really be out or hadn't passed to be out on the cloud. So.
Okay. All right, Kory, how about yourself?
Yeah, similar story as Dan there. So overnight it was, you know, the week prior was everybody's in the control room. You know, you've got your usual production roles and working as a group, and then overnight we had to do everything from the house. So we started out on Zoom webinar because we had to do stuff that very next week, and then quickly migrated over to vMix as well. And then just started experimenting with stuff beyond that to try to break up those production roles. So doing graphics and separate platforms and things like that. We always had to run primary and backup pairs with different technicians, just because of the nature of network and power outages and all the likely things that tend to happen at a home environment that we can't really control that well. But yeah, that's the direction we took and kind of stuck with that for quite some time. The quality for remote speakers was really nasty at first, until we got some kits out there and standardized on some of that stuff. And you got to train up the presenters, VPs, C-level folks and whatnot to be framed up, have a quiet environment, all the usual suspects there. So that was kind of it in a nutshell. And then I changed companies kind of in the middle of it. So it was interesting to see, depending on the location that you are at, the strategy kind of shifts from an in-office perspective. So Coinbase is very much remote first. Seemed like they were going to kind of dump all their offices for a minute there. So we went full bore on full remote with nothing in office. I think they're turning around a little bit on that and trying to get folks to come back in, but it's very touch and go depending on the week.
When you sent out the kits, what was consisted of a kit?
It was usually like well, depending on what we were doing, because if it was internal versus external, we would send different things. So it was more, if it's external facing, we might do like a C300 kit or something with a little ring light or something. And we would usually send folks on location to get set up for something like that. But if it was something internal, we just kind of standardized on just like a Logitech Brio and a ring light, and usually just a standard USB microphone.
Something to make sure that they weren't they were well lit, they had a good camera in front of them, and they looked good on camera. Or
exactly
as good as possible.
As good as possible, yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, Waseem, how about yourself?
Pretty much similar, right? We started very casually prior to the pandemic, always managed and looked after the larger type of events like town halls and so forth. And, the volume was comfortable. And then like that, you went from maybe 2 events a day to 10 plus events a day, right? And our challenge was really being able to take care of everybody globally at this point now. We do a lot of client-facing external conferences and seminars, and all of that had to be transitioned into something new and different, right? So at the time, and we still are leveraging MediaPlatform solution, but with just too many people globally across EY, right? We're like 300,000 plus, and you can't do an event for everybody. So along with, the powerhouse platforms that do webcasting, we made a decision to turn Teams on, and we pushed out the whole self-serve option, right? And a lot of that volume was looked after from individuals, from people, courageous people, if you will, right? And then a lot of the bigger events still stayed with us. And much like with what Dan did, we were quick and nimble to push out a vMix solution, right? So we typically had what we called encoding centers, New York and London. We would pull our signal acquisition in. A lot of our presenters, a lot of our events really always happened out of a studio space, right? We would hire, but now everybody was at home. So we were smart enough that we were toying with vMix prior to the pandemic, and it just transitioned really smoothly for us, right? Within a few days, we were taking in all this volume and just maintaining it. And as we went along, we figured out a great workflow, what to use as a green room, the fly packs or the kits that we would offer our C-suite and presenters, and just built an etiquette, right? And a workflow, not only for people who needed to do these events, but for us from a production side. And I mean, all that being said and done in this time, we've just learned really, really well how to manage all that volume now and to up our production value. We're still doing vMix, right? But in a hybrid fashion where we have some dedicated studios across the globe, or we're partnering with third-party studios and getting signal in like SRTs, and we're mixing from our remote studios or home studios. It's still busy, it's still exciting, right? And volume is always going to be a challenge for us. Everybody is spoiled at this point. They know what a well-produced webcast is like versus just a talking head and slides, if you will. So everybody wants that production value at this point, right? Irrelevant if it's 50 people on their event or 50,000. And that's what we do, right? We hit our global all people up to 75,000, excuse me, right? live. So it's exciting. We pushed the technology. We got a great workflow. We got a great team, and yeah, we're still continuing to manage what we can when it comes to volume and demand.
That's interesting as you run through that, because when I was joking about how easy it, or sort of half joking about how easy it was 3 years ago, we actually got settled in pretty good on remote as well. We felt like we were in a good place, and then boom, hybrid. So now, like, doing one or the other is actually easier than doing both because we haven't over resources or added a number of new resources to be able to do this. So now the expectation is to do both. So now you've got kits that are sent out, but you've also still got to run your studios. You've got some of the tools that Chris mentioned in here, like we got a team that runs some of the StreamYard shows, but then they also have to know how to run the Grass Valley switcher in the control room, right? So everyone's got a new set of skills, but then you have to be able to somehow scale that and satisfy all that new expectation that you listed, which is everyone wants to, some areas of expectation lowered, right? You could get away with a Zoom cam on CNN and on MSNBC and everything else, but other things haven't. Now there's an expectation that you're going to bring in 20 people remotely and have someone come up on stage and do a shot from a studio. So the expectations have gone up.
It's hard, right? It's just to add to that, it's not just, well, what's the best platform or perfect platform for me to be able to have a great experience for my audience. It's all this production and technical direction that's involved to make what goes into that platform an exceptional experience, right? It's very demanding now, and it's challenging. It's fun, like lots of toys to play with, lots of things to figure out and do, right? Security is the most challenging aspect in an enterprise. What can go out, what can come in, right? There's a lot of these nuances that you need to create some sort of protocol internally to make happen, and to be able to do these things really, really well, right? And quickly, and be able to execute in a way that not only is it convenient for your production team, it's convenient for the people who are perhaps doing the moderation, right, in a platform or an event, and especially for your speakers, So the ultimate green room experience is something that's equally as important when it comes to all the tech that's involved behind making these things happen.
That's great. So Mike, you have a lot of customers, so you get to see sort of like the big picture of what a bunch of different people are doing. Are there some other than the trends that we've been these guys have been talking about so far, which seems like we went to cloud production initially and now we're kind of doing both. Are there other trends that you've seen out there with your different customers?
Yeah, I mean, the comments I heard, they're absolutely spot on. And whereas I would have described this as a product company before the pandemic, all of a sudden we were in the trenches and we're working beside these production teams, figuring out how to replicate what they did in a studio and bring that remote. And so like we're all just scrambling to preserve the status quo. At the same time, the entire universe is trying to become video viable. And that's a whole other world, where people are just trying to meet and continue to communicate. I'd say, where we are now, 3 years later, where we're back to having concerns about security and privacy and scalability and reliability and production value, and becoming more and more discriminating about what is the right tool for the problem you're trying to solve, what is the right way of presenting. I think this is a really, really exciting time because people are becoming so well educated in what's available out there that they can be more discriminating. And so, whereas I think maybe a year ago, there was a lot of confusion and people would say like, well, don't you compete against Zoom and, don't you compete against Teams? I mean, these are very symbiotic solutions. They're exceedingly valuable, and pretty much everybody and anybody should be using them in some capacity. And then contrastingly, there are times when you really want to project something that is elevated and distinct. And we're seeing more and more commitment to that. So I think to Dan's point, to Waseem's point, there's a lot of complexity. I mean, are you leveraging an ECDN? Are you leveraging a CDN? Do you know where your employees are on any given day? How are you targeting them? I mean, those are problems we enjoy working out with our partners who are the producers because they're not simple. But at the end of the day, I think the space is in a much, much better place than it was a year and a half ago, where 150 different solutions were all conflated into the umbrella term of video. And no one really cared whether it was for meeting, whether it was for a virtual event, whether it was for a webinar, whether it was for a town hall. And now I think we're getting into a time where people can make long-term strategic decisions and execute on those decisions at a really high level, which is, I think, extremely exciting for everybody, because that limbo of not having certainty affects everybody, and it ultimately impacts the value of what's being produced and its effectiveness. So that's what we were seeing across our customer base. But I think the panelists more or less nailed it. I mean, we were right beside them trying to tackle some of the same questions. And when the challenge is, how do we maintain the status quo when, in Waseem's case, I think they may have sent 450,000 employees home, a very short time span. I mean, that's a challenge. And it's, for this area of technology, an unprecedented challenge. And I think, the producers in these environments did an absolutely unbelievable job keeping their companies communicating during that time.
That's interesting when you talk about like the producers and the folks that are watching this and the folks presenting. The area that we're in a way, helped set us up. Meaning, if you're in live, you're flexible. You're able to make changes. You're likely keeping up on tech. If you're watching this, you're keeping up on tech. You know where things at. You have a nice little toolkit that you could pull from if you need to. So that flexibility, it did feel like in this space, there was a lot of adoption and adaption very quickly. And I think that just comes from a mindset, I would say, more so than you might have seen in the film industry or some of these other areas that would have had sort of more legacy, either systems or workflows. So we were lucky in that way. And the challenge has been coming out of it, because now anecdotally, we'll get a request, from a customer or a partner, and they know all the tools. So are we going to do this way? And these are all the different platforms I could use. But at least we're still, the question is still for us to say, no, you should use this particular streaming platform as your output because it has this chat feature, et cetera. But yeah, I think you're right. We've come out from that large, wide load down into something more manageable.
Okay, so we got a bunch of questions coming in, which I want to get to, but first I wanted to ask a question, actually. So I think it was Waseem said, the amount of people now that want to do these events is, I'm assuming, pretty overwhelming for a lot of you guys. And so I'm wondering, and I've seen this too with a lot of my clients, is that they'll say, well, if you want to do like a high-end sort of production type thing, then you have to pay for it. And then we have the people and the facilities in order to do that. If you just want to do something for your team that's 100 people and it's your quarterly update for your sales team or your marketing team or whatever, you can do that through Zoom webinars, Microsoft Teams, or whatever. Is that something that you guys are seeing, and does that help, I guess, pay for a lot of the advancements that you guys are able to do moving forward?
It definitely helps with controlling the crowd, Andy, right? We have an intake process or a filtration process, if you will, where we have people who consult, right? Somebody will submit and say, I got to do a webcast on day X. These are the speakers. This is the geography we're targeting. It's going to be internal or external. We want polls or no polls. And then we'll speak with them, right? We'll talk to them, get an understanding of the creative that's involved. Is it simply something small enough and doable from your end with self-serve? You can choose between Teams or Zoom, right? If you want that polish or top self type of experience, yes, absolutely. There's going to be costs around that, right? And then to those costs is the team or the team's availability present right? Can we make it work for you? We have to do this, right? Otherwise, everybody's knocking on your door, waiting forever, trying to push their webcast, and everybody's webcast is equally as important as the others, right? Of course, C-suite gets priority, right? No question asked. We make it work, but you have to have some sort of workflow to create a crowd control, to manage expectations, and then to feed the purpose, right? Maybe that 100 or 50 people event would turn out to be far more engaging if you did it in the style of a meeting versus perhaps doing it as a webcast, right? So a lot to consider and a lot to consult on, but definitely you got to start with that intake process to get the client where they need to be.
Yeah, and for us, we are lucky to have a sister team that includes account managers, and their knowledge of all the process and all the different platforms has helped at least set up on those initial calls, those initial conversations, some realistic expectations. They also have a roadmap so that maybe 80% of our work is something we know is coming down the pike, so we can plan for it and resource for it. And then we had a conscious effort to hand off a lot of things and put them back into DIY mode. Everybody now knows how to use Zoom. There's no more excuse. So everyone knows how to we Zoom, and by default, pretty much Zoom webinars. So we essentially drew a line under some level. We had some criteria that we went by, and under that line, it was essentially became a do-it-yourself. We gave them all the tools, we gave them all the licenses to do it, and that allowed us to free up and actually concentrate on keeping the production level high on those key elements. And all of our work comes from the key initiatives that LinkedIn have and the priorities that it has to kind of check some boxes from that team, that account manager team, and then it comes in to us. So that helps keep it manageable. Before times, our system of keeping or sort of limiting how many events were coming in were our spaces. Everything was in a space. So we had 5-6 spaces, let's say. You could book those spaces. That was our constraint. When everything went remote, there was no more physical constraint. There was no more sort of booking constraint that would limit how many events people could request. So that's why we had to tighten up on our criteria, and it's helped immensely.
It's interesting, just to add to the space element, right? Those space also had high price tags. And when we went virtual, the space was literally your home, right? So we became very efficient at doing these types of events, and it became extremely cost effective as well to do these virtually, right? And one of the things we will continue to ask is, what's your budget for your experience, right? Are you falling on the midpoint, on the self-serve, or are you really top shelf at this point, and we can do whatever we want from wherever we need to? Right? So cost is also a critical factor in helping people decide, what they need to use. Do they do it themselves, or how this plays out from a creative angle?
Kory, how about you?
Yeah, we do something rather similar. So we've got basically our intake process. We tag things in one of 4 priorities, P4 being the lowest one. That's the self-service. And we did have to build up, a nice, healthy kind of catalog of self-help material. It's like, okay, if you're not familiar with moderating stuff on this particular platform, here's a quick how-to. We've hosted brown bag training sessions and stuff for general employees so they can take care of their stuff, but it's a lot of deflection. So as much as possible on that side. And then, everything else has kind of been constrained by just the schedule, like how many resources we have available for each show. And the negotiation part generally comes down to what date do we have availability? Does that work for you? And then if they can't move that stuff, it's always a budget conversation, to Waseem's point. Do you have a little extra? We can produce the show for you and kind of moderate it from that perspective, but we might have to pull in some outside folks to help out.
Mike, since people are using budgets to purchase your services and products, is that something you see out there too, that the high-end stuff is kind of becoming a charge for most of your clients?
I would say it's kind of philosophical. I mean, it goes
Yeah.
from company to company. Some companies are structured that way, and whether you just impute a value to whatever's being produced, whether it's actually like, kind of this funny money that goes from business unit to business unit, we do see that, and we see it as a way of enforcing accountability, of sort of structuring KPIs and running your business unit almost as a standalone business. So I think it's a good practice. There are subsets of our customer base for which I don't want to say money is no object, but there are certainly events where they're communicating to their entire employee base, potentially their employee customer base, their partner base, and the way in which they present, kind of going back to Steve Jobs and sort of telegraphing the importance of the content or of the product or of the service by the way in which it's packaged and presented. There's not a lot of talk about, what's going to be charged back. It's more about this has to be pulled off perfectly. And we have some very, very talented producers with enormous amounts of creativity, and we don't want them handcuffed. We want them to be able to sort of express themselves. We want our C-level executives to be able to express themselves in ways that aren't kowtowing to the technology that's being used to bring that message out there. So that's super fun. I mean, I'm sure everyone on this panel has been in environments where they've really felt like they're able to channel their creativity. They're putting out work product that they're exceedingly proud of. Their employees are incredibly proud just seeing the work product of the company they work for. I mean, to me, that's the kind of halo events we love being a part of, and we love seeing our product being used for. And at the same time, hey, we all have to be accountable. We all have to be organized. We all have to manage our resources in economical ways. And we try and facilitate that as well and ensure that, you're using your distribution methodologies as cost effectively as possible. You're using your talent as cost effectively as possible. And, you're balancing the best of both worlds, whether or not it's actually making it onto an Excel spreadsheet and a P&L, and there's a menu for each of these items. It's kind of on a case-by-case basis. But I do think that kind of rigor, and accountability is a best practice.
And what we have, I guess most platforms seem to be this way, meaning once you've got, and perhaps MediaPlatform isn't the same way, but once you've got X amount of plan, you can do essentially as many shows as you can or as you need to. So for us, if we're using Teams, we've got a Teams, like from the platform side, our cost is kind of sunk. It's built in. If we're using LinkedIn Live, it's in there. Doesn't have a net cost to us. It costs somewhere on an Azure server. But so from the platform side, that I think has helped people, for good and bad, to be able to do a lot more webinars, right? If you have unlimited webinars, everyone's doing one kind of thing. But it does then come down to resources like Kory talked about. Do we have it? Is there space on the schedule? And then how do you adapt for that? And that's for us where budget often comes in, because if the customer or the partner needs to pay out of pocket or something to bring in either a team to supplement or to augment what we're already doing, then there are real costs, which is not a bad thing, because there should be a cost. There should be a value of what's being presented, and it's okay that it costs something, because it costs 10,000, but it's making the company 100,000. It's a pretty easy equation.
Yeah, Dan, to your point, there's nothing that drove me more nuts about my particular industry than when you would penalize people for using the product a lot. I love a fixed cost model. I love a situation where you're encouraging people to use video more and more. I would say the only time we saw, where people might have been a little bit caught off guard is when they moved everybody off their eCDN to a public CDN, and then the variable costs, may have changed a little bit. But for the most part, I think the model you described is the right one for the industry, where it's one of the tools in your communications arsenal, and use it as frequently and as effectively as possible. That's definitely the way to get adoption.
Yeah, I've had a few attempts at
questions coming in, but I think we're going to sort of answer them with the next question that I have. Like Chris Packard from LinkedIn asked about, is software productions, is there still room for that? Steve Warden is asking about, what does a hybrid corporate meeting look like in your opinion? But so the question that I was going to ask is, so where do we go from here? What are your new initiatives that you're looking at? What do you see? Where do you see yourselves going from here on in? So why don't we start with Kory on this one?
Yeah, hybrids are expensive. They take a lot of resources for sure. And furthermore, I think you have to kind of run two distinct shows there. You've got your remote audience that doesn't get that break in between sessions and networking opportunities. So how do you fill that space, and what kind of content are you pushing out? Maybe it's commercial style or whatever the case may be. You do have to fill that space, or maybe have some unique stuff that's not for the in-room presence. It's just for the online folks only. As far as technology stack, yeah, we've been looking a lot at just going full Amazon Media Services. So building our own stuff from scratch. I know that's a steep hill to climb. There's a combination of vendor partners and stuff that we have been looking at, but going in that direction versus the on-prem kind of solution that we've been doing in the past, which is home rigs and having multiple primary and fail or backup kind of scenarios going on. So yeah, I think it's still TBD for some folks. And yeah, we'll see kind of where it goes. I do like the fact that we've been able to kind of experiment a lot more with all the stuff that has happened. I think that's been opened up quite a bit more, and people aren't stuck in a particular solution forever. It's constant experimentation on what works best and how to make a better product in the end.
Great. Waseem, how about yourself?
I'll echo what Kory's saying, right? Hybrid is challenging. To me, it really comes down to what level of engagement are you looking to create, right? And to me, that should be equal, whether you're in-person audience versus remote audience. Your ability to communicate with the presenters, submit QA polling, or even somehow to some degree interact between audiences is critical, right? I don't believe that we're gonna see a shift ever back to full-on in-person large audience or complete virtual, right? There's pros and cons to each. I strongly believe that a virtual element will be attached to any type of event or experience, unless it's some super top secret, CEO meeting. But when it comes to events, when it comes to experiences, there will always be a virtual part to it. It's just trying to figure out that engagement piece, which is, I think, the most challenging. When it comes to signal acquisition, and you have to bring in a remote speaker with a in-person panel, I think we're all clever enough to figure that out. There's so much gear and ways to do that at this point. That's not the hard part, right? You mix the traditional broadcasters of the world with the IP broadcasters of the world now, and you can get anything done. You can get a signal from A to Z, no problem, right? I don't believe that software encoding or studios here. I'll give you a quick glance of the life I live every day, right? If NDI wants to, this is me, right? I'm a vMix shop. We have multiple remote studios like this at homes. They're redundant internet. We got Cisco switches. It's the whole nine. We treat it like it's a facility, right? It actually is. But this type of stuff gives us the capability to be rapid and adaptive to any type of event or any type of situation. And it doesn't mean that we can't partner with a huge studio based out of New York or London and do a mix and match of whatever the production requires, right? Just right now, like you'll see a Zoom session on the side. That's our green room, and there's a live event happening right now. And I'm pulling an SRT from my partner and sending that out as a backup or a Bravo, right? And I also have a recording going. And if he goes down, I can just flip to my instance of the show, and the audience has no idea, right? So there's a space for all of this stuff. It's really going to come down to you understanding your client and you understanding what that production needs. Of course, you can't do this for everything, right? This is the top shelf stuff, if you will. But this methodology just needs to be ironed out for your environment, for your organization. That's it.
So do you do everything over the network now? Have you totally gotten rid of like SDI and connections like that? You use NDI and SRT to.
NDI is great. You know, it has its place, definitely. But if I could choose SDI over NDI, I would. We have physical locations, physical studios across key offices, and we still use those, right? And we might use that because we have a group of speakers that are present in that office that day and they want to come in from there. So we'll have, you know, switching coming off from that end, bringing a signal into here. We're mixing it with remote speakers, right? And they can all see and hear each other, and the audience sees a nice mixed show. So it's art. It really is. It really is art, how we put these things together and what we present to the audience.
Right. How about you, Dan?
Well, I like the idea of the sort of thinking more about the quality of the audience piece, something we struggled with before. Often if you talk about an external show, our largest one these days, it's Talent Connect. Used to be a number of cameras pointed to a stage and you just kind of got what you got. We uploaded that before COVID by having a dedicated studio that had content just for the audience. And now that often most of our audience is going to be remote, right? Sometimes there's smaller, more defined audiences, but most of the time your actual big numbers are remote. So there's a lot of work that goes into on-site in terms of creating engagement and allowing interaction of people there. But what we try to do, and we have our stream team, so Chris, who asked the question, is responsible for making sure that not only the acquisition of the stream, but also the distribution is right. He's got a lot of tools. He's got all the tools for acquisition on the StreamYard side and Restream and others, but he's also got tools with should it be on LinkedIn Live? Should it be on Yammer? Should it be on YouTube? Where should it be? And thinking about that audience, that's always been my mantra, is respect. I think is the word I like to use, respect the audience. How would you step into the event? Is there 10 pages of registration that you have to do? Is there no way to communicate? Is there no recording? Is there no follow-up? Like all those pieces that we all knew was a thing has now become an expected normal. So that's one of the advantages of this fast forward, this speed up that happened with COVID, bringing technology that might have taken, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years to come up. Now that's all fast forwarded. And so we have those options. So it's a lot of choice, but trusting people who are watching this and are on this panel to actually make the key decisions to choose it.
You want to show some of those pictures of the environment that you were showing before?
Yeah, sure. Most of these, let's see, most of these are on-prem. So this is our on-prem, which is still there. And hopefully no one asks me what each of these bits of kit does, because I won't be able to answer. Some things I can recognize. Like I think we can all recognize some elementals down there. Some things I don't know what they are. This is actually so for us, we have studios, which you'll see a couple pictures of. We have event spaces, which I don't think I took a picture of or shared a picture of, but these are actually whisper booths. So for LinkedIn Learning, they're doing both audio and video recording in here. So that's something
the presenter would actually go in there.
Yeah, so the instructor's on one side, they're actually presenting, and then there's a producer on the other.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we call them instructors. So that in the hybrid world, and still is, that's where remote kits went out to replace what was here. It had to basically have essentially like a little podcast kit that went out. Here's our control room. This is actually 2017, but things haven't changed too much on this end of things. Usually it's full of people. It's actually 2 control rooms, so we can open those doors and make it one large control room, or have 2 control rooms. This is a LinkedIn Learning set. So this is relatively simple. I see one camera in this particular setup. Here's a LinkedIn set. This is in New York. This is something that LinkedIn editorial media uses. And then a simple green screen also for LinkedIn Learning. And then here's a shot from Talent Connect. So we still have a stage show element And so you then have to take that broadcast or turn that into a broadcast that people will want to view.
Very cool. Hi, Mike. What are your customers asking you guys to innovate in the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, sticking with the theme, hybrid is top of mind. And I think just to kind of drive home the point, people say work from home, work in the office, or hybrid. Well, hybrid is absolutely every variation between those two extremes of work from home and you're in the office. I mean, it could be someone in the car, it could be a third of the workforce on site. So you're trying to deal with that fluidity. And the point I think Dan and Waseem and Kory all made is, start with thinking about the quality of the experience for the audience. How can you create a high level of engagement for someone who may be sitting in that live audience? Can they participate in the Q&A, the polling? Can they vote their sentiments? Do they feel like they're getting the same experience as some of the online people that are participating? And then, from our perspective, that may sound pretty easy. I mean, back in the day, you'd have devices where you could vote. So, that type of technology has been around for a while, but the real trick to it is having the right amount of engagement for wherever that person is residing or watching, and also not compromising the other aspects of online presentations that you may have really grown accustomed to having. For instance, tracking, monitoring, analytics, quality of service monitoring, security, authentication, not having to say it's either this or that. It's kind of this, we're going to create the optimal experience that gives both the audience and the producers, or the producers and the presenters, everything they want from this experience. I would say the other element of hybrid that's changing immensely and very quickly in our area of the industry is the acquisition of these ECDN companies. You had Peer5 acquired by Microsoft. They're embedding the distribution technology in Teams. This is an area of innovation where you'll be able to aggregate some really critical quality of service metrics, some real-time monitoring that's kind of holistic across ECDNs and CDNs. You'll be able to do some really interesting things with silent testing, very interesting things with failover. That might be about as glamorous as, getting your chimney swept or something, but for day-to-day successfully delivering content to tens of thousands of people, it's mission critical. And it's an area where under the umbrella of hybrid, we're spending a lot of time and really investing in our partnerships with companies like Microsoft.
Yeah, on the ECDN side, it used to be a pretty easy sell for us. We would just keep it at its most basic value, which is when you have a lot of people on site, you want to be able to distribute effectively to them. And then we all went remote. So my first project coming into LinkedIn, not even knowing what an ECDN was, turns out. So I guess my interview process didn't catch that, but it was to onboard an ECDN and use it. And then we've been using different variations here out. But the question does come up with our ECDN: do we need it? Turns out it has lots of other valuable features, like you talked about, analytics and failover and other features that we actually do need. And I don't know that that's. I think some people automatically said, well, I don't need an ECDN anymore because we went hybrid. But yeah, there's still a place for an ECDN. I don't know that for us, we need quite as much. Like, we're not relying as much on the on-site campus features, but yeah, definitely still want to look at what an ECDN is. So, that something that I didn't know what it was, and use it, or at least talk about it. And it's something you have to get out in front of, because your IT folks, you don't want your IT folks knocking on the door after onboarding a platform that doesn't have an ECDN feature or some solution like that.
Yeah, I've heard a couple different people say, I don't need an ECDN anymore. And I'm like, well, eventually people are going to start coming back in the office. And when they are in the office, not only are they doing, webcasts and webinars, but they're also doing video conferencing. So there's a tremendous amount of increased video on the network, and you really need to get ahead of that to make sure that your events don't fail. We want to go back to the early 2000s when you have a big webcast and it went down because you decided to decommission your ECDN.
Well, I think there's a reason.
Let's get a couple more questions here. We only have a few more minutes. David Perry asks, what approaches do you find work well to encourage and enable the online audience to engage with the presenter? So that's a good one. Whoever wants to jump in on that has some good ideas, go ahead.
I mean, the tested and true and easiest is QA, right? Yeah. Making sure you set time aside, probably towards the tail end of your event, because it's much more controllable from a content perspective, to have that quote unquote open dialogue with your audience, right? It's very important. I'm not gonna lie, we do events that are literally to the second, and we have to have some canned QA to give the impression that there's an engagement, right? But make it a point that you are able to engage. If your content is really top and tail the hour, then you got too much in there to say, right? You might as well do a couple of events. There's a sweet spot where you keep people's attention, right? I'd say 45 minutes is like the new hour when it comes to a webcast. You spill your content out in 45 minutes and give respectfully your audience 15 minutes to ask whatever they need to. What we've also seen, which is really popular, is, for example, with a Zoom webinar, you can pick anybody from your audience and give them the ability to ask a question live, right? That's cool, right? That's really bringing in now a true experience for an attendee that was remote to be able to do something like this. So QA is key. I mean, polls get boring, right? What else is there? They really want to talk to you. That's why they join in the first time, to listen to you and then to ask questions. So push QA.
Very meta. Yes, that. And I think, with us, we have LinkedIn Live, and you'll see, I guess we'll call it comments that are coming down. And what we'll do is then be able to bring those comments in. So there are a lot of tools out there that can do that, right? So extract the actual question, bring it in, and it's a lower third. Some people like to see their at whoever, their Twitter handle or whatever it might be, or their LinkedIn profile in there. So that helps with engagement too.
Yeah, I think just the ability to customize kind of how folks engage. I mean, every show is a little bit different. So, do you have a curated QA with moderation set up, and is somebody managing that? Is it that level of thing? Or do you just have an open chat where it's like free for all? Some people like stuff like that. Or is it sentiment analysis on certain parts of the show? Those types of things. The other one that's worked out, I guess, good and bad is how do you bring audience video into the presenters when it's a full remote show? You can do some of those things where you have a separate Zoom and you invite a certain group of people and then show a multi-view for the presenters for them to engage with, but then that's not your entire audience. And how do you kind of manage that? Curious what the rest of the panel has done in scenarios like that, actually.
I was just going to add one quick thing is from the vendor's perspective, and we all talked about how you have customers as well, is just about providing options. So I don't know that there's one right answer, but I'll tell you, if you show up and all the people can ask questions in an anonymous fashion, a week later, you're going to be asked to do that in a non-anonymized fashion. Like, it's just having that flexibility to accommodate different requests. So we don't look at it as, any one person has the exact right way to do it. It's just make sure you can, pivot quickly if you're asked to do so, and put the power in the control of the producers who need to respond to these requests.
All right, I think we're getting the hook here from Eric, but I wanted to put a shameless plug in that there's another great corporate and education session tomorrow called Beyond Corporate Communications and Training, which is going to focus more on sort of like outbound revenue generating type video. But Eric, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, everyone. That was a terrific discussion. I love the fact that that Waseem and Dan and Kory, I don't know if you did as well, showed your setups. It's always nice to get a peek behind the curtain. So thanks for doing that. And thanks to everyone for attending. The winner of the Amazon gift card for this session is Lynn Elliott. the song was Barracuda by Leon Russell. Nobody got both artist and song correct, but Lynn was first with the correct song identification. So Lynn, keep your eye out on your email later in the week for information about that gift card. Thanks again to Signian for sponsoring this whole week, and to MediaPlatform for sponsoring this session. We will be back at 2:30 Eastern time with Tech Talks from Recurly and Stream Voodoo. So I'll see you then. Thanks.